Welcome back to Metaconscious Leaders, where today we explore what lies behind our everyday perception of life and how what we discover can reshape our life experience and our leadership practice. We'll dive deep into the inner architecture of transformation with a man whose work bridges the timeless wisdom of traditional spiritual practices with the practical precision of modern behavioral science. Tom Fortes Mayer is a clinical hypnotherapist, author, international speaker, and the creator of the Free Mind Process, a powerful framework for unlocking peace, power, and purpose. Through his work and his charity, the Free Mind Project, he's on a mission to equip people and, by extension, the organizations they lead with the emotional intelligence, clarity, and courage to thrive in our complex world. For business leaders listening, this conversation isn't just about self improvement. It's also about discovering the inner states that allow us to lead with calm authority, creative brilliance, and a deep sense of direction, even when the stakes are high. Tom, welcome to Metaconscious Leaders, and thank you so much for being our guest today.
It's an absolute joy to be here.
Tom, before we hear about your epiphany, which is a particular experience that you've had that's very central to what you're doing now, would you just give us a context? Tell us about your day job. What are the things that you're doing so people who are not familiar with your work get an understanding at the outset as to what you do, and then we'll go into what sits behind it and below it and all around it.
Thank you. So I kind of work at the moment, there are kind of two main projects that I am working on. So my day job, as it were, is helping business owners and as entrepreneurs and social change activists with their psychology, helping them be more successful, not get burnt out along the way, and enjoy their success when they get there. I have 25 years as a therapist. I developed this methodology for helping people have breakthroughs, have rapid epiphanies, locate the blocks that are in their way, and by removing those, help them take their lives and their businesses to the next level. So that's been huge passion for me, working one-on-one with people and helping them change their lives. But over the years, I got increasingly more frustrated that these tools need to be in the mainstream for the everyday people who wouldn't necessarily be able to afford working with a high-end therapist or a high-end coach. So my social change now is building a platform which teaches people what I call the big six. These are the most powerful transformational tools that everybody needs to understand that enable them to manage their own well-being and manage their own psychology and bring the best out from themselves and the people around them. And so, yes, it's a bit of a Robin Hood model where I charge good money over here, and that kind of funds the development of this kind of more mainstream social change project.
Right. Okay. And thank you for that short sort of précis. And would you take us back? Will you now go into what you describe as your epiphany? Because I think is this the right place to start? Do you think, or is there something more to say before we go right into that? Because your life changed pretty dramatically in a very short space of time, and so say a little bit about what you were doing and that experience, and then that'll we move on from that into its application and what you've been doing with it since.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's the best place to start because prior to this experience, the single event epiphany, I was a very cynical, skeptical person. If you talk to me about a lot of things that you'd like to talk about, I would have thought it was kind of just hogwash and psychobabble and honestly nonsense. And so I sometimes refer to myself as the original doubting Thomas. If I can't touch it, taste it, if my five, albeit limited senses, understand the logic of something, then I dismissed it. And then I was confronted with an experience which completely changed my paradigm. And I loved that because I was talking evidence that you can be completely wrong about life and not know. And actually, at any given moment, someone can shift what they believe and what they think, and they can change their life in an instant. So my private practice, I never went into private practice to be a therapist. It was a laboratory in which I was testing a person's ability to engineer epiphanies because I could see the ingredients in my epiphany, my paradigm shifting moment were everyday items. There was nothing magical about what created the shift in my perspective. The shift in my perspective was magical, but the experience itself was mundane.
So, Tom, when you're doing this for others, are you also doing it for yourself? Is working with others also a means of you continuing that journey for yourself?
There was some years back, I got involved in a European Social Fund project where we're looking at what makes for great places for people to work in, what creates brilliant cultures. And I took a break from my private practice for about 6 months to work on this project. It was an amazing opportunity, but I had no idea that my private practice kept me sane. I had no idea that it was a significant part of my keeping me emotionally balanced and aware, because every time you work with someone, you're refreshing the principles by which everything works, and everyone you're
Yeah.
helping is an aspect of yourself. And so absolutely, I find working with people, totally keeps me on the straight and narrow.
And yeah, and I find it inspiring as well because, I mean, when I first started off on the coaching line, it was that I was losing interest in the work that I'd been doing, and all I wanted to do was the personal journey. And then I found that it occurred to me that going into coaching was a way of sharing my journey with others who are also interested and would benefit from it.
Mm.
So when it dovetails, I think it can be even more powerful because we keep ourselves honest in that way.
Oh, 100%. And I learn so much by working with clients. The thing I love most about supporting people in that way is, and when we live, ideally, if we're paying attention, we get wiser, we get more conscious, we see the interconnection of things. But when you're in that privileged position of working with lots of people and in their life decisions, in their wisdom kind of gleaning, you actually, it's almost like you get the wisdom of their years, of their life story. You see their mistakes, you see the better choices. You learn a huge amount about how to live by learning from
Yeah.
other people's stories.
Yeah. So you were living this life of hedonism. I've heard you use that term before in other contexts.
Yeah.
And then you had this epiphany. And so would you say a little bit more about it? And I love the way that on occasions I've heard you talk about the impacts, almost like what was happening internally, what the impact was for you internally, and then almost separately what the story was as it unfolded, as the events unfolded. There's a kind of inner and outer to this, which I think is a very good way of telling it.
Okay. Well, I remember we had this conversation. We had a lovely conversation in a coffee house, didn't we? And I kind of went into the whole story. So, yeah. So you're right. I was a hedonist, and I still consider myself to be someone who's a hedonist, very profoundly. My life is about the pursuit of joy and pleasure. I now just have much, much better tools and have a much better understanding of what creates actual happiness and the connection between success and happiness, and how most people think I'm going to work on being successful and then I'll be happy. Whereas it's much more effective as part of your success strategy to work on being happy first, and then to therefore be much more effective in what you do, and therefore much more likely to have success, but also enjoy it.
Yeah.
Up until 27, I didn't know that. I was what you could call, I was a profoundly lost person. But the thing I find most disturbing about that was I didn't know I was lost. I thought I was having a great time. I was a nightclub promoter. I was running raves, parties. We were putting on parties in Ibiza. It was all sorts of fun. I was probably wearing oversized silver jewelry and trying to convince myself I enjoyed smoking cigars, which I did convince myself, but I'm not sure was totally true. And yeah, it was all about just the pursuit of pleasure. I was born in the kind of psychedelic raves of the early 90s. That's where I had my first kind of real connection with powerful levels of joy and pleasure. Obviously, not necessarily based on health and real happiness, but they were transformational for me. And they, while starting in the kind of underground and illegal warehouse parties in England in the early 90s, found their peak when I discovered the incredible raves in Goa in the early 90s and in India. And this is where thousands of people from all cultures were coming together. They were all free and they were extraordinary. And they changed my life too. But they washed away the social conditioning that you had to go out, be part of the 9 to 5 rat race and all of those things. So I considered myself to be a fairly free being. I didn't work very hard. I was making good money, having a lovely time. And when it came to the up and coming millennium, so this is 1999, everyone knows how disappointing New Year's Eve can be because it's so loaded. So I wanted to give myself the best chance of having the best party. And I knew still that there were amazing parties happening in Goa. And so I convinced a friend of mine that we should go to India and that we should be in Goa for the bringing in of the year 2000. So I don't know if you remember, there was all that paranoia about the millennium bug. I also thought
Yes.
it'd be an organic place, so that if the world did just go up in flames due to some terrible millennium bug, which didn't happen at all.
And the planes fall out of the sky.
Yeah, I'd be somewhere at least tropical and joyful. So that sets the scene. We'd been driving around that night looking for the best party. There were a number of parties happening in North Goa that night. And we actually ended up driving back to a place very close to the hotel we'd been staying at in Vagator. And it was amazing. The other parties had been a bit disappointing. We were starting to feel worried that this was going to be disappointing. But no, this was an outside party set in an enclosure, palm trees and uplit trees. And it was extraordinary. Probably 3,000-4,000 people at the peak of it. Huge sound systems, incredible DJs. And I began dancing properly, probably at about 1:30 in the morning, really getting into it. And I carried on dancing until the sun came up, which for me at those times was fairly normal. That was fairly standard. But I carried on dancing that day until the sun went down. And I have never, ever danced that long or since. It was like 5 ultra marathons. It was extraordinary. And I ended up finishing dancing at about 11 o'clock. And of course, I'd stopped for, refreshments or going to the toilet. But in the main, I had danced solidly for 17 hours. And when I left there, I couldn't see my motorbike, because it was still awash with other motorbikes from all the people that come from all over that were still dancing. But my hotel was just around the corner. And so I walked back there. And as I walked back there, I thought I was going to sleep for a week. I was exhausted. When I went to bed, and to my surprise, I woke up at about 6 o'clock in the morning. And up until that point in my life, I had never felt so crisp or clear or present. I didn't even have a word for it. I now know that I was profoundly present. And to my amazement, I could still hear the thud of the kick drum in the distance. The party was still going on. And I woke up and I, unsurprisingly, was ravenous, absolutely starving, because I'd used up so many calories with all that dancing. And it was too early to go to my favorite haunts for breakfast. And typically around the edges of the dance floor and spread throughout the kind of venues, there would be these chai mamas, these warm, wonderful Indian women cooking this delicious Thai on their kerosene little stoves. And they would often have cakes and snacks and things. And I thought, oh, I know, I'll go get a cup of chai. I'll see who's still dancing. I'll eat a cake. It's going to be fun. And I also needed to pick up my bike. So I walked back to the party and found myself looking now on a scene that was much, much emptier, maybe 100 or so dancers, some of which I imagine had arrived way after me. And it was a very sweet scene. The sun had come up. It was a beautiful kind of morning, as you'd expect in Goa. And the music changes at those parties. In the night, it could be quite dark. But in the morning, it lifts and it lightens and it's more jubilant. And people really respond to that shift in tone. And that was happening. And there was a lot of joy, And there was a lot of joy. It's now the 2nd of January, the year 2000,
Yeah.
And one hell of a party, right? And now up until this point, like I say, I wasn't a spiritual seeker. I wasn't in India for any spiritual reasons. I was there for the party, right? I was there purely for the hedonism. And I had been brought up my whole life to be a passionate atheist. My father was a passionate atheist, not remotely agnostic. And in India, I found it fascinating that there was this whole culture that was built on these spiritual concepts. And part of that I found fascinating were these wandering holy men, these wandering babas, somewhere between 15 and 20 million of them walking around India. Men and women who have decided that if you operate as a vessel of truth and love, you'll be provided for. Now, even though I didn't believe in any of that, I have huge respect for anyone who's dedicated to their faith. And so I was impressed. I thought they were deluded, but I was always kind of touched by that kind of commitment. And I also thought, try doing that in Kentish Town on January 2nd. You'll freeze to death. It's okay to do that in India. It's slightly more clement weather, But when I went to that party, before I decided to get that cup of tea, I was looking around at where to kind of sit. And I noticed there was this holy man observing this scene, which I thought was fascinating. And I was really drawn to him. Now, I know that now. I know about synchronicity. I know about intuition. I know how to follow the cosmic breadcrumbs, At the time, I had no idea what was happening. I felt strangely drawn to this wrinkly old man wrapped in mustard yellow cloth. I was like, what is this about? Right? And I was questioning it for a while. And then I thought, well, just, go and have a cup of tea there. Maybe you can have a cool conversation, And I sat down, ordered my cup of tea, and he kind of welcomed me with that beautiful, just wobble of the head, very sweet. He had a nice warm energy. And I sat there for a little while sipping this delicious tea. And there were a few things happening on the dance floor that were playful. So we chortled together a couple of times. And I thought, I might really get a chance to speak to this guy, because I could really feel that there was a reason for me being there deeply. And I just made it mean that I was there to have an interaction with him. Felt very clear, but I was confused because this was a new kind of sensation, this intuitive certainty. And these chai mamas are often very warm, kind, welcoming characters. But I'd only been there like 5 minutes. And this woman started having a go at this holy man, which is also quite unusual, in Hindi. Now, I don't speak Hindi, so I'm going to have to guess what was being expressed. But my sense was that she was saying something like, it's been days, you're known for not having any money, you've had 10 teas and 5 cakes, the party's winding down, when the hell are you going to settle your bill, right? And it was amazing because she was really quite acrid with it. It's quite strident. And he just looked at her and just kind of wobbled his head again, didn't say a word. And she kind of scowled and then carried on stoking her kerosene stove. I thought, wow, this guy's powerful. This guy's powerful. I could feel that. And I thought that was funny. And then I was struck by a new understanding, the likes of which I'd never felt before. I knew exactly why I was there. I had one job to do, and it was totally clear. I was there to pay his bill. And this was not some generous act. This was not some kind of charity. This was not something I wanted praise for. It was really clear. I just had to do this thing and get out of there. I couldn't speak to him. I couldn't ask for praise or recognition. It was like an instruction. And I was like, okay. And so, I smoked then, and I had, I put together a little care package, enough money to pay for 20 teas, which is probably £5, some things to smoke because they love to smoke. And I put together this little care package and I put it in a cigarette box where he would find it in a few moments. He would find it, he would know it was left there. And I then paid for my tea. And it was really important that I didn't get praise. It was an anonymous act. And I walked away. And as I walked away, I was flooded with the most powerful kind of flood of dopamine I'd ever felt before. It was a rush of absolute pleasure. And it was like the most amazing chemical thank you from the field. That's how it felt. It was like I had a job to do. I did my job. And it felt amazing. And in that moment, I realized that this seemingly deluded, sweet man who was walking around the world as a vessel of truth and love, who believed that if he could be an embodiment of the divine, that he would be provided for. And I had just, as an act of science, been part of that mechanism of balance. And it was so interesting. It was obvious that was my job. And it was obvious I'd done it. And it was obvious he was to be taken care of and looked after.
Exquisite.
It was exquisite. And what happened to me next was that flood of pleasure expanded to the point where I could not stop laughing. Like it was the best news ever. I lived in a connected, benevolent, organized, intelligent universe that if you were in alignment and coming from a good place, you would be provided for. I had tangible evidence. And so I burst out laughing, but at exactly the same time, my heart broke. Like it totally broke because I had misunderstood the whole of life. And in that moment, I realized I had caused so much pain and had been so afraid to be free and to be me. And I wasn't a particularly anxious person, but I realized how much fear and anxiety had compressed me and limited my choices and kept me down. And so I was laughing and weeping at the same time. And it got a bit self-conscious because it looked weird. It felt weird and I thought it would have looked weird, but I didn't want it to stop because it felt amazing physically. Yeah. And so I did that type of walking when you're kind of not running, but you're walking really fast. And saw my motorbike, thankfully, and jumped on it. And I was able to drive up Vagator Hill, which was half a mile up the road, up this track. And I left the track and kept trying to drive my bike up to the top of the hill. After a while, it started to slip and I leant it like against the slope of the hill and then scrambled the last 30 meters to the top. And I had what can only be described as a kind of half-hour experience of completely dissolving and experiencing myself in that moment without any fear. And it was only when I experienced myself without fear that I was able to realize how much fear had defined me. And this thing that thought it was called Tom was this incredibly sweet blink of an eye in this ancient eternal field that I now seem to be experiencing myself as. And that fundamentally changed my view of myself, of life, of spirit. And I sent an email to my then business partner that day. I'm not doing this anymore. I don't want to run nightclubs. I've been peddling happiness in the worst way. This is real happiness.
Yeah.
And I can't state this enough, Greg. I mean, up until 27, you could count the amount of books that I had read on two hands. I had never applied myself at school. I had never cared about anything in terms of subject matter. I'd have been really sporty. I'd been an athlete, but I just didn't connect with any of that stuff. And it was perfect because if I'd been brought up as a Catholic, that would have been a Catholic experience. If I'd been brought up as a Buddhist, it would have been a Buddhist experience. If I had any knowledge in that brain of mine, it would have been polluted. And so after that moment, I just developed a voracious appetite for understanding epiphany, psychology, philosophy, anything I could get my hands on to explain what real happiness is, where it comes from, and why our modern life seems to get in the way of our natural contentment so much. And that was the beginning of what turned into an experiment around I engineer epiphanies for people so they can transcend their anxiety and have a different view of themselves and life and find a context of meaning and purpose within a field of consciousness that we're all playing our part to evolve, because that is the purpose of life. I've seen that to be true. And I want to be very clear for anyone listening to this who's maybe cynical or skeptical about this. I was the most cynical and skeptical person around this stuff. And most of my clients for years were not people that were into consciousness or spirituality. And I have attracted, because of the bridge between my old cynical self and my new understanding of reality, puts me in a perfect position to work with people who don't really think about life in that way and are therefore held back in ways that they can't even imagine, because they think purpose is about a vocation or a job or even philanthropy. Those are beautiful things, but that's not our essential purpose.
So again, what is essential purpose?
Well, I can give you my least romantic metaphor for the purpose of life. So you'll have to forgive me because it's not very pleasant, but I think it's honestly the most accurate description of our purpose. And as leaders and as business owners, we have to understand this too, because we have staff and that's what their life is for. So I honestly believe that we are the shit-eating bacteria in the sewage plant of God's heart.
It sounds like this is another way of framing this, is that ours is a sacrificial life.
I think that's one way of describing it. I think for me, we all inherit a packet of pain, doubt, our parents' mistakes, this little packet of crap that we have to munch through, that we have to purify in our own lives. You know,
Sorry, you gone.
well, I was going to say, for years, because after this epiphany, I went on every weird and wonderful, wacky workshop. I say to my clients, I went on all the weird things, so you don't need to. I've distilled and codified what you need to know. Save yourself. You don't need to do all of that. But a lot of the time on some of the intergenerational healing workshops, one of the things that's common is the person turns around to their ancestors and says, or their parents and says, this is not my shit. This is your shit. Take it back. And I now think about that and reflect on when I've done that. And I get really upset about it because I think that's really not the right approach. And I'm not saying that isn't valuable. And some people have had great breakthroughs from that. So whatever has floated your developmental boat is fine. But I think there's something more beautiful that's possible, which is we're meant to say to our ancestors, our parents, you couldn't process this in your time with your skills. I will take it. I will not pass it on to my children. I will transform it in my own heart to pure knowledge and wisdom. And I will offer that to the field. That, I believe, is our purpose, that we are meant to transform the pain and fear and doubt, the animalism, the aggressiveness, the possessiveness, the unbalanced materialism, all of the primal stuff that comes from our animalism, and then all of the generational stuff that comes from our families' painful stories, and not allow it to close our hearts, to open our hearts again and to share that wisdom. So many people, you'll see this, Greg, and probably this podcast is an extension of that. When people have had the benefit of being exposed to wisdom, they want to share it. And it turns into books and podcasts, and that's wonderful. But really on an energetic level, I believe our purpose is to be the transformation as we walk around through the world. That is how we clean the field. That is how we munch through our inherited crap, And as business owners, I think it's so important to understand everyone who's working with you and for you has their own pocket of rubbish to transform? And how do you create a context of meaning for work, which is a character gymnasium? Like if this is more about, invest in your employees' personal development is the simple answer. But the deeper answer is help them fulfill their purpose through your organization. And they will love you forever, be deeply loyal, and obviously be a better version of themselves as a result of that investment.
Something you said really strikes me. You mentioned it a moment ago when you went back to your hotel after you'd been dancing for 17 hours and you woke up and you felt absolutely present in a way that you had never done before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that state, if I can call it that, continued right the way through the rest of the story until you were up on the hill and you were falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit more describe that state? Is it a state that you have experienced since or continue to experience at different times? Do you know how to get there? Or
That's a great question. So let's create some distinctions, because the state of presence, I think I was clear enough to understand the instructions that were given to me, and I was calm enough and courageous enough, and they weren't very difficult, to follow that intuitive invitation. What followed then was a very, very high state of bliss, a very, very high state of bliss. And since that time, there have been a handful of times in the last 25 years where I have felt something akin to that, but it has not been anywhere near as powerful. So that pure state, that moment of clarity, had a vibration to it because it was so in contrast to my existing paradigm. Now, those moments of magic that I experience at times is a beautiful, gentle confirmation of what I already know to be true. I'll never have that paradigm shifting, shattering experience again, because my paradigm is I'm already on the team, So, and I'm grateful for it. And it wasn't what followed afterwards. We'll speak about a little bit more about presence in a moment, but what followed afterwards was not easy, because I didn't have a spiritual teacher or a spiritual practice, because I didn't even really understand what happened to me was a spiritual experience. When I tried to talk to people about it, I very painfully heard from other friends that those people were describing that I had found God, but I still thought of myself as an atheist. And so that was very confusing. It was very confusing. Now I understand it's just because I had a limited, weird, socially conditioned idea about God that was very limited. And they were, of course, right. But I wasn't talking about, a man in a throne in the sky with a beard. I was talking about a field of connected consciousness of which we're all part, and that we can play a collaborative part in evolving as a field. And that's a very different thing. Trying to, bear in mind, my friends at the time were all, nightclubbing ravers. So they essentially thought I'd gone mad, and I was not clever or careful, because I just wanted to tell as many people as possible. So I hurt myself, and it was very complicated. And learning how to speak about this stuff, it's taken me a long time. Now I care less, and I'm much more open about these things. But for many years, I didn't talk about it after the first year, because it was so often confused and painful. Yep. But that state of presence, I think, is available to everybody, and we can have it in small degrees. But I know, Greg, we could get a punnet of really delicious strawberries, and we could sit down to watch a great documentary on something wonderful, or even a Marvel movie, whatever it may be. And we could scoff those strawberries whilst watching the movie or the documentary and not taste one of them.
Yes.
Or we could do that tantric exercise where you blindfold yourself and you eat one strawberry and you take 5 minutes to eat it, and you pay attention to the majesty and obvious divinity in one strawberry and weep at the marvel of the universe, And that's the essence of a spiritual life for me. That's the essence of tantric sex. It's like, stop messing around, stop doing so much, pay attention to what's actually happening right here. And everything that you think you're going to feel when you get to this imaginary place that you're getting to in your 5-year plan is available right here. So why are we doing it? And often people say to me, well, then why am I doing anything? I'm like, why are you doing it? It's like, if it's not bringing you extraordinary joy, don't.
Okay, this is a fabulous story. And I could just listen to you for a very long time, talking more and more in depth. And I've got more questions, which I'd love to ask you at some point, with a nod towards time marching on. We want to bring this into the context of leadership and business, and how your insights, how you rolled those into a model that helps people in business and leadership. But before we go there, I just want to touch on the global context. And context is essential to meaning, it's essential to our understanding. And This context is a context of what's happening in the world now, which situation in which humanity is in the midst of a polycrisis. Some will describe it as an unfolding catastrophe, a meta crisis. Now, situations, they have their nature, and I don't want to go into what's happening and what these crises are and so forth, but they're there. And we just want to acknowledge that that's the context of so much of what's going on at the moment. There are lots of headwinds, as it were. But the bit that I want to ask you is the other aspect to any situation, which is how do we respond? And how do you respond, Tom, in this global situation, this these predicaments that humanity is finding itself in, emotionally, intellectually, energetically? What's your
Thank you.
response?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll give you the response that I would given you over the since 2013, because in 2013, I got really burnt out. And I had been what can be described as an activist. I had been trying to make the world a better place. And I really caused a lot of trouble for myself and my family. And I didn't have my own well-being at the center of my choices. And so I was tearing around trying to do everything. I was going into prisons to reduce crime rates and to improve, rehabilitation processes. I was going into schools to make them more emotionally intelligent and so that kids would leave actually happy and empowered, which was, a rare thing. I had a big pro bono part to my work, which was exhausting me. Had very few boundaries. I got really badly burnt out, and I learned a lot about what doesn't work in activism, and I learned that if we're pushing from despair, it's unlikely that what we're doing to make things better is going to make them better, and we're definitely probably going to hurt ourselves and burn ourselves to a crisp. But at the same time, how do we not care? Like if you're paying attention and you really feel into where the world is at, it's pretty easy to get pulled into the kind of, a sense of devastation, and even more so at the moment. And so what I would have said previously and what I realized, what arose in my consciousness as I processed that burnout was something that I'm not sure still works for me now, but I'm going to share it with you because it's brought me a lot of peace, but it may be time to change that because things are calling for more action now. But for a long time, one day it struck me that a lot of 13-year-olds are self-serving, self-centered, shallow, aggressive, unconscious, and that would be normal. Not all of them, obviously, but if I were to meet a 13-year-old and experience them in that way, because that was certainly true of me when I was 13 and true of a lot of people I knew, I would not think that there was anything wrong with them. I would think that they were young. I would think that they're a teenager and life is going to teach them. Life's going to bless them and curse them, and they're going to learn the hard way and they're going to learn the easy way. And over time, they'll become more rounded, decent humans, because that's what I've seen happen to so many of my friends. And so a while back, it dawned on me that human consciousness is a teenager.
Interesting.
There's nothing wrong with it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's proprietorial, it's territorial, it's materialistic, it's self-serving, it's egoic. It's a teenager. So is there something wrong? In a world where in that moment of clarity, I experienced this kind of divine interconnection where everything has purpose and everything has reason and everything's actually kind of amazing. But it's like, if you have a horrible foreign policy, is it possible that people will fly planes into your financial districts? Yeah, maybe. And if I don't drink water in the morning, I might get a headache in the afternoon. Now, the headache is horrible. And so is a terrorist attack. It's a terrible thing. And yet it's all part of an interconnected system that makes sense.
Yeah.
And whilst we're making bad choices and human consciousness is young, then it's laying down seeds of difficulty and destruction that, as horrible and as unpleasant as they are part of the compost for the evolution of consciousness. So how I now take comfort in what I do is I think about the people in the 1700s who were building cathedrals, who knew that their children's children wouldn't see that cathedral completed in their life. And so I'm coming to work every day. I'm laying bricks. I'm part of making a cathedral of consciousness. I'm doing my best to make sure my bricks are nicely lined. I'm doing my stonework as neatly and as beautifully as I can. I'm doing my bit. I'm doing as best as I can. And I'm trusting that over time, we are building a cathedral of consciousness that is evolving. And I would have said that to you as my stock response up until about a year ago. And now I am questioning whether if someone is burning down my cathedral on the other side of it, if I should maybe do something to douse the flames or disarm them from their violent ways. So it is a very complicated time to be conscious and to understand, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to accept? What's the part I am playing? As a parent, it's clear, make my children better citizens, as a husband, as a community member, sure. But if there was ever a time that was calling for a revolution where people would band together and say, hell no, we need to do something different, it would be now. And you wonder how many times you need to get hit around the head by something before you say, maybe you could stop that, and it would seem, you called it, a polycrisis, which I think is a really nice word for an absolute clusterfuck, right? I mean, it is a shock out there, and it is hard to hold steady, like, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but when someone asked Gandhi what he thought about Western civilization, he said, I think it would be a really good idea.
Yes.
It's a bit like that. And so if I think about, well, probably 500 years from now, we may have developed a fair and just and beautiful society. And if I can play my part in laying down that possibility now as a blueprint, then that would be a beautiful thing. And I worry that I'm sincerely considering advising my children not have children, because I don't know how it's going to be and how it's going to go. And maybe it could be so turbulent in the transition that maybe that would be too hard a life for them. So I don't know. It's hard. It's difficult.
Yeah. There are plenty of other things that come into there, and one that just enters my mind there was agency. To what extent do we have the choice of what happens and occurs in our lives? Because I've certainly made decisions and determined on one particular outcome, and it hasn't happened. And it's like, well, hang on a second, why did you let it happen? Well, it happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if the agency that we perceive we have is illusion.
Listen, this is a very unpopular topic, Greg, but free will is it's that most people don't like to think of their will as not being free. But in my experience, in so many ways, for so many reasons, our will is compromised by things outside of our control. Where we were brought up, our family's belief systems, the education we're exposed to, the country we were born in, all of those things impact on our decisions. And if we didn't have conscious control over those decisions that have impacted on our decision-making capacity, that's not free will. That's limited will at best, right? So that's just one example. Even the neuroscientists have proven that when we think we're going to get up to go to the toilet, we think we've had the idea and then we move. Truth is, we're already moving for a whole second before we have the conscious idea that we're going to the toilet.
We are now moving into the era of philosophy, which metaconscious leaders will be going into in some depth in the new year.
Nice.
At which point I invite you back to have a conversation, and we'll do this, because this is exactly the ground on which it's ground that we need to visit.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Agreed.
our philosophy is the foundation of the meaning that we give to life and the universe. And on the basis of that meaning, we then develop purpose and values and systems and laws and everything. And our philosophy in the Western world is one that is, well, let's just say it's not working.
Yeah.
And let's just draw a line on it at the moment for that, because we'll come back to it. It's a big topic.
Huge. Yeah.
All the things we're talking about are related to that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's absolutely fundamental that we go there,
mm-hmm.
because if our foundations aren't right, then nothing else will be right.
Agreed. And you're right that philosophy underpins everything, and I think also just understanding that you have a philosophy running the show, so that enables you to build true tolerance and to be able to, once a year, I take my most precious beliefs, and I recommend all business owners do this, all humans do this. Take your most cherished and precious beliefs, the things you're most certain about, place them on an altar of critical thinking and ask yourself the question, how is this wrong? How might this be deluded? And tear it apart. And when I do that, I often come out with a renewed certainty about 80% of my beliefs and quite a shocking humility at how deluded I am and how deluded most people are. And that humility brings a compassion for all belief systems. And that creates the space for much more peaceful international relationships. But philosophy is everything.
So let's move on to how you have integrated the insights that you've gathered in these experiences, in your life experience, into leadership. And before you say anything, I personally see leadership and being in business as a wonderful laboratory, as a wonderful place where we can develop ourselves, personal growth, as well as fulfilling a whole lot of material objectives of providing food for the family and so forth.
Hmm.
But that is where we put most of our time. That's where we put most of our energy.
Mm.
And hey, that's a place where we can be so richly fulfilled. So you've created a model
Hmm.
which is peace, power, and purpose
Hmm.
as a way I see it of kind of gathering all of those insights that you've won in your time and bringing it beautifully into a model that can be used in business. Do you want to say something a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, so when I work with people, 80% of it is their personal development. Yes, we talk about strategy. They use me as a sounding board. Having helped lots of people, I've learned things along the way. And I also have a network of people I can introduce them to. And yes, there is strategy. But in the main, it's all to do with relationship to self, relationship to other, and relationship to life. And so peace, power, and purpose is really about that. Our peace is our relationship with ourselves. Our power is how we interact with others. And our purpose is how we live within the context of meaning with life. So as I mentioned before, there are what I call the big six. These are the big six transformational tools that everyone, I believe, whether you're a business owner or not, should know. But it was only after I was using this, I had a practice in Harley Street for years and I was working with all sorts of people. But I noticed when I applied this methodology with business owners that they went on to be a lot more successful and a lot happier. And so over the last few years, I've ended up just focusing on business owners and founders, especially people who are social entrepreneurs, because if I can help them be more successful, then their projects are going to make the world a better place. So that's my great joy, helping people with a real social mission. Also, because a lot of people like I was who have a social mission, it can dip into that activism and that really doesn't serve the world. It doesn't serve them and it can actually create more problems than good. So I really love helping people who are on a mission to change the world because they often need a lot of help. But what I realized was these three pillars. We need to develop a peaceful relationship with ourselves. We have to come to peace with who we are, which means we have to come to peace with everything that has happened to us. So what I experienced in my moment of clarity was that the most free state of mind is someone who has the felt sense of a deep yes to the moment. That's the purest presence. It's the most powerful and purposeful state, but it is the most peaceful way of being. And I realized that in order to be a 100% yes to the present moment, we have to be a 100% yes to us because we're in the moment. If we're in it thinking that we need to be taller or, richer or have more hair, then
Yeah.
those are all subtractions from that ultimate state of contentment, of peace.
So peace as a foundation, is that right?
So peace is where I start, but they actually intersect. They all become equal as one, really, in the end. But I start with peace as a foundation because in order to be at peace with who you are, you have to become at peace with every single thing that has happened to you. And so if you were to speak to a lot of my past clients, they would talk a lot about trauma healing. Now, for me, I'm like the Bliss guy, right? The Bliss success guy. But actually where my sleeves are rolled up and where the hardest work is, where 70% of the work is healing the past. And that is fundamental to being able to have that foundation of peace from which we can then be our most powerful state. Because once we're at peace with ourselves, we're not attached to outcome. We're way more creative. We're way more spontaneous. We're not defined by our past. We're refined by it. We've turned our mess into our message. We're driven with a deeper sense of wanting to serve. So that foundation of peace enables us to tap into our most powerful self.
And what are the blocks to peace? And also something that you said earlier in the experience in India struck me, which is that we tend to normalize our states. So I think I'm chilled.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only when I go and get my blood pressure taken on one occasion and it's alarmingly high that I realize, no, I'm not chilled.
Mm-hmm.
I've just normalized
Mm-hmm.
my state of being.
Yeah.
And that is now chilled, but it ain't chill.
Yeah.
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 And the same, I think we can say for peace. Yeah, I'm at peace. But then you experienced a deep, deep peace and presence, which took you to another level. So what are the blocks to that, or what's going on that gets in the way of? Because I've heard you say, and I completely agree that I think happiness is joy is our natural state,
Mm-hmm.
and other things get in the way of it.
Yeah,
So
100%. When I experienced that bliss, the bliss did not arrive That was who I was, it's what I am, and what it was the obstacles to it that were removed. And I watched them come back. As that bliss state dissolved, I felt my personality come back. I felt its fears come back. It reduced my sense of bliss. But our natural state of consciousness is bliss. And so what I've seen that disrupts our peace, our power, and our purpose are just 3 beliefs. And these 6 techniques that I've developed turn these beliefs around. So the belief that blocks our peace is I am not okay. Deep down, I am not good enough. There's something faulty. I'm not adequate. Where did we learn that? When our needs weren't being met when we were younger. Instead of being actively aware that we were being let down, we translate that as being a reflection of our value. So it serves us. People think this is an esteem issue. It's not. It's a self-sabotage issue. To defend against the pain of our past, we told ourselves that's what we're worth. That's what we deserve. So we harbor these deeply held ideas that we're not okay on purpose. And people think it's a self-esteem issue. It's not. It's a different issue and it needs a different solution. So the tools that you use there to resolve that are you go back to the formative moments when you fell out with yourself or fell out with life or thought you weren't okay or you departed from the sensation of yes. I call them no moments. You can find those formative moments where a certain belief was formed that's limiting you. And you can negotiate with that part of your psychology that formed that limiting belief. You can actively locate the negative emotions that are stored in your body that take your mood average down. You can release the negative emotion and you can transform the limiting belief. And when you do that, and it's what I call is laundry, and most people will have at least 30 or 40 significant moments where they forged limiting beliefs and stored negative emotions. And if you can just teach people this technique, they can locate these moments themselves. They can dissolve those limiting beliefs. And more importantly, they can integrate that previously repressed aspect of themselves, which is full of creativity, power, resource, playfulness. You bring these parts in and you suddenly get whole new ideas about how to run your life. It's amazing. So the belief that blocks our power is the belief that something external to me is the solution. It's the materialistic idea. When I get over there or I get that thing, then I'll be okay. And the problem is external to me. And so what gives us our power is the recognition that no, it's on me. I have everything I need within me, and how I feel is not based on what's happening. It's based on what I'm thinking about what's happening. And that's the ultimate power move. We realize we are not the victim of our story, and it's not about being great in spite of it. It's actually being amazing because of it. That's the
We are the creator of it.
We are the greater of it. And then you are untouchable. You have peace and you're ultimately powerful, and you believe there was a purpose to everything. That's what brought you here, which means every room you walk into, you believe there is a purpose to you being there. Now that's powerful. And that's where people go, cool, come into our project or marry my daughter, or, it is powerful and it's embodied. The most amazing thing about that kind of power is it's ultimately fulfilling. We're fulfilled because we are being our best self. And it becomes less about outcome. It becomes less about 6 figures or 7 figures. Those things are fun, but where we derive our fulfillment is not from what we're doing, but from who we're being. And that's ultimately powerful. The belief, I'm rattling through these because I'm aware of time. The belief that blocks our purpose, I believe, and I know this because I had this belief, I had all of these beliefs, is I am a pointless nothing in a meaningless universe. So it's the atheistic position. Therefore, there's no point to anything. There's no purpose of anything. So the beliefs that I help people restore is I am perfect as I am. I have everything I need within me and it's on me. And I am a unique and important part in a connected conscious universe. And if someone walks around with those beliefs and they believe them, they have peace, they have power, they have purpose, and they're going to be a lot happier. They're going to be a lot more successful. And at that point, they won't even need the success to be happy. Because, you hear this often when people say money doesn't make you happy. And I think that's really unfair on money. The truth is, if you're unhappy, money won't fix the problem, right? It will amplify your sadness. 100%. Like 60% of people who have big exits, successful exits in companies, 6 months later, they're depressed because they think that the money is the answer. It's like, no. The answer is peace, power, purpose, contentment, capability, and meaning. And then you'll be happy. Then if you exit with 20 million, then honestly, you will have more fun. And that money will be an absolute source of joy. But if you don't have that primary foundation of contentment, then those achievements just feel meh. You might be excited for a couple of days, but it doesn't touch the sides.
I love the way you describe power as tapping into your potential and flowing through life with brilliance.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of talk about success. And I find there's quite a bit of confusion, I think, around what is success. And I almost think that there are two ways of looking at it. There's success for me personally, and there's success for something bigger.
Hmm.
And I find that there's quite a lot of mixed messages which are sent out. There's one particular um, sort of business guru who has kind of quasi spiritual leanings, who says that principles are ways of successfully dealing with reality to get what you want out of life, which I mean, yes, one could squeeze a higher purpose in there. But actually, the way that it's worded, to me, sounds like a manipulation of
It's
to get
transactional.
something that I want, I need to make me happy. Again, it's the external thing. And so purpose and success, I think do you want to,
Yeah, so
do you
let me
agree with
speak to
that?
that. So success for me is about power. When I'm working with my clients, I help them step into their power. That is about peak performance, flow states, creativity, accountability, leadership, presenting, all the skills that enable you to be powerful. That's where you'll get success. That's where you are well rewarded.
Right.
Purpose is about our soul and the spirit of our evolution. That's when we know we're playing a small part in the evolution of consciousness. What's our purpose? To work through everything that tells us to close our hearts and to believe, to move from the limited, fearful, selfish, materialistic personality and step into identifying and experiencing ourselves as part of the large, connected, impersonal, loving universality. Our purpose is to transcend and to no longer be defined by fear and limitation. Now, interestingly enough, if you do that, are you likely to get better jobs, make more money? And people, I used to think it was make money and be a philanthropist. And for me now, that's not purpose. It's fun. It's fulfilling. And is it likely, if you really take yourself around peace, power, and purpose to the next level, that you'll have the kind of success where you have the capacity to do amazing philanthropic things? 100%. But ultimately, I think it's about walking around with a twinkle in your eye, kindness in your heart, spring in your step,
Yeah.
and joy.
Yeah. I love that. I just collected there from you that our purpose is to be present in the moment,
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now comes to mind. Kind of all arises out of there. It's a springboard.
100%. But it's really difficult to be present if you're still angry with your dad.
Correct.
It's really difficult. And it's also really
Yeah.
difficult to be present if you're not powerful enough to be creative and capable enough to cover your rent. So you need all of them. You need to, yes, there's a spiritual realization of the meaning of our life within a spiritual context. That's purpose. We need to feel like we've absolutely smashed it and done our best and brought out the best in others and developed our capabilities. That's really important for fulfillment. To be self-expressed is where our power is, and that's where we'll make our money. And peace is having a deeply, loving relationship with ourselves, which is unconditional, and restoring that.
Tom, thank you very much indeed. I know time is running out for us. We will do this again.
It's been
And
wonderful.
I look forward to it because there is so much here that we haven't been able to cover. Is there anything that you would like to say in closing? And where can people find out about you and contact you and get more information on you?
Thank you. Yeah, if they just go to my website, which is w's.tomfortismayor.com. That's the best
Okay.
place to kind of reach out. And yeah, I think, the most important thing is when someone's looking, for a long time, I took my personal development far too seriously. I took my spirituality far too seriously. And I think I was given advice by the brilliant Rachel Elnoff, who was one of the original dragons from Dragon's Den. And she said that she'd heard from someone else. So she can't take the credit of it, but she shared it with me, that our dreams are best held out in an open palm like a feather waiting to be lifted by a warm breeze to fruition. And I was just like, that's beautiful. We over effort and we actually strangle the possibilities in that.
Yeah. Tom, thank you so much for your time, your presence. You've been a phenomenal guest with us today. Be well. Take care.
Thank you. It's been a joy.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did. And if you want any further information about Tom and what he's up to, please, you'll find the link in the show notes below. I also invite you to subscribe, follow, and like us if you haven't already done so. Please feel free to share this with friends and colleagues, and also leave a comment as well, because it's really useful for us to know what you're thinking. Until next week, thank you for listening. and watching. Be well.